What's up, night owls? Welcome back to Demon Sleep. Real quick, drop a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from tonight. I personally read every single one of them, and honestly, it makes my day seeing you all from around the world. If these dark tailies help you drift off or just escape reality for a bit, smash that like button and subscribe, but only if you think we've earned it. No pressure. Alright, lights off. Rain on, blankets up. Let's dive into tonight's nightmare fuel. Story 1, The Ghost Town the Sea Swallowed Whole. When Peter made a promise, time bent to meet it. If he told you a job would be done tomorrow, you could count on it being finished before the day had fully learned its own name. In his jacket pocket, he carried a smooth wooden pipe carved by hand years ago. He never lit it casually, only at the highest point of a climb when effort had been paid in full. For him, ritual mattered. It was how he honored work done right. That same discipline followed him into the mountains. Before the climb truly began, Peter paused, hands moving with quiet certainty. He tested each strap of his pack, shifting the load until it rested exactly where his body could carry it without complaint. He lowered the edge of his wool cap just enough to cut the sharp glare spilling over the peaks as dawn climbed behind him. Then, without ceremony, he stepped forward. He didn't chase the summit, he let it come to him. His pace was unhurried, almost meditative, steps measured, breath steady, strength conserved for what he knew was waiting ahead. The trail led him through twisted, weather-worn pines, their branches bent by years of wind and snow. Beyond them, the land opened suddenly into a wide stretch of alpine flowers, fragile bursts of color defying the cold. Peter slowed, not out of fatigue, but respect. Above him, a lone hawk traced lazy circles in the morning sky, riding invisible currents. Peter watched until it drifted out of sight, then moved on. A narrow stream crossed his path, its water freshly born from melting ice. He knelt, cupped his hands, and drank. The cold was so sharp it stung straight through his teeth. He welcomed it, wiped his mouth, reset the pack on his shoulders, continued upward. Then the ground betrayed its softness. Earth gave way to ice, dense, ancient, and unforgiving. Peter stopped at the edge of the glacier and reached into his bag. The metal spikes were heavy in his hands, scarred from past climbs. Sitting on a slab of stone, he fastened them carefully beneath his boots, pulling each strap tight, inspecting every point. He tested them one by one, fingers numb but precise. On this surface, carelessness wasn't a mistake, it was an ending. Satisfied, he rose. The glacier was a maze of silent threats. Narrow fractures split the ice, some no wider than a doorway, others swallowing light entirely. Peter read the surface like a language he had spent a lifetime learning. Slight dips, faint shadows, subtle changes in texture that whispered danger to those who knew how to listen. With his wooden axe, he tapped the ice ahead, solid, hollow, solid again. Each sound told a story. Progress was slow, almost painstaking, yet Peter felt calm, focused, alive in a way the lowlands never quite gave him. Here, every step mattered, and he trusted himself to place each one. By midday, the sun stood high, turning the glacier into a blinding expanse of white fire. Peter found a narrow ridge of dense blue ice and lowered himself onto it. From his pack, he took out a simple meal, firm cheese, coarse bread, and a small red apple polished by the sleeve of his jacket. He ate deliberately, savoring each bite, eyes drifting toward the distant valley below. Somewhere down there, tucked between trees and shadow, was his home, quiet, waiting. He chewed, swallowed, and breathed in the thin, bright air, unaware that this moment of stillness was not just a pause in the climb, but the calm edge of something far larger about to unfold. From where he sat, the valley looked unreal, tiny rooftops scattered like pebbles, a river drawn as a thin silver thread. The sight settled something inside him. For the first time in months, his mind was quiet. When the food was gone, Peter folded the apple core into paper and tucked it away. He left no trace, never had. He packed his things with the same care he used in every part of his life, then took out the small wooden pipe. He filled it slowly, lit it, and sat in silence as pale smoke unraveled into the sky. 10 minutes passed without effort. Contentment wrapped around him. This, right here, was exactly where he belonged. Eventually, he stood, brushed crumbs from his trousers, and turned his body downhill, already planning the long return to the valley. That's when the light changed. Not suddenly, but wrong. The sharp brilliance dulled as if someone had drawn a veil across the sun. Peter looked up. A dense wall of gray clouds was spilling over the western peaks, moving faster than seemed possible. In the mountains, weather doesn't arrive politely. It rushes in like an ambush. The cold struck first, then the wind. Snow followed, fine and biting, needling his face, erasing edges. Peter stayed steady. He'd been through storms before. The rule was simple: get off the ice, get lower, get back to trees. But the wind kept building. Loose snow lifted and spun into chaos, swallowing the world in white. The landmarks he relied on, blue ice, dark stone, vanished as if they'd never existed. There was no up or down anymore, only motion, only noise. A flicker of unease slipped into his chest. The sound deepened into a roar, not whined anymore, something louder, angrier, like the mountain itself screaming. Snow pressed in from all sides, so thick he couldn't see his own boots. Each step felt like stepping into nothing. He clenched his ice axe, fingers numb, grip desperate. Beneath him, the glacier groaned, low, vibrating, alive. His breath shortened, fast, shallow. And then the ground disappeared. One step, one fraction of a second, the world dropped away. His stomach lurched as gravity took him. Instinct kicked in. He drove the ice axe into the wall, but the surface was merciless, his speed unstoppable. Pain exploded through his shoulder as he struck a narrow ledge. For a heartbeat, he thought it might hold. It didn't. He slid again, faster now, swallowed by cold and shadow. Light vanished. Sound collapsed into silence. And then nothing. The cold doesn't announce itself. It simply closes in. You come to awareness wedged inside the mountain, trapped in a slit of ice so tight your shoulders scrape stone when you breathe. The walls press inward, 40 feet above you, sealing off the sky. Snow keeps sliding down after you, whisper soft, relentless. Up there, the storm is tearing the world apart. Down here, there is only silence, so complete you can hear your heartbeat thudding like a warning. Your leg is bent wrong. One glance is enough to know it's shattered. Pain claws at your throat, begging to be released as a scream, but you swallow it. Screaming wastes air, wastes time, and time is already slipping. No one saw you fall. No one knows where the ground vanished beneath your feet. You weigh the impossible choices. Try to climb with a body that won't obey, or stay still and hope the mountain remembers you exist. The answer is taken from you almost immediately. Snow keeps pouring in, packing the narrow space tighter, heavier. A slow burial. Patient and unstoppable. Your fingers won't listen anymore. Cold seeps deep, numbing thought itself. In that fatting space, memories surface without warning. A kitchen table, warm light, familiar voices waiting for a chair that will stay empty. You cling to those images as if they're ropes. Your hand finds something in your pocket, smooth wood, worn by years of touch. The small object grounds you, proof that you lived carefully, fully. You close your eyes. The ice moves in, and the mountain keeps you. For 50 years, it says nothing. Searchers come and go. Footprints vanish. Questions echo and fade. The glacier holds its secret without malice, without mercy. Down below, time keeps marching. Stories replace certainty. The man who went up and never returned becomes a cautionary tale, then a legend. His wife grows old with a space beside her that never quite closes. His children grow up, then grow families of their own. The world accelerates into something unrecognizable. Deep inside the frozen dark, nothing changes. Then the heat comes. A summer unlike any before loosens the ancient ice. The glacier retreats inch by inch, surrendering what it once claimed. One afternoon, near the edge of the melt, two hikers notice something unnatural breaking the gray slush. A leather boot, intact, laces still tied with care, too deliberate to be debris. They step closer. A pack emerges, then a tool shaped by use and habit, the past rising into daylight. Authorities arrive. The recovery is slow, reverent. The body is not reduced to bones. The cold preserved what time could not. In a pocket they find a small wooden pipe. Wrapped carefully, a scrap of paper holding the core of an apple. Ordinary things, human things. Science does what decades of searching could not. A match is made. A family line traced forward until it finds a face that mirrors an old photograph. A grandson carrying the same eyes. At last the silence breaks. The man is carried down the mountain he loved, through the village that never stopped remembering him, and laid to rest beside the woman who waited a lifetime. Half a century of unanswered questions comes to an end. The mystery is solved by the very force that created it. The ice lets go. The land itself is always shifting, reshaping, correcting its balance. In time, the mountains give back what they claim. Ice releases its dead. Stone loosens its grip. And yet, not every truth is frozen beneath snow. Some are sealed behind walls of history so thick they feel untouchable, waiting for the rare moment when darkness dares to move. Just before dawn on November 25, 2019, Dresden was smothered in a freezing fog that dulled sound and swallowed distance. At precisely 4:59 a.m., something snapped beneath the Augustus Bridge. An underground transformer exploded in a violent burst of white sparks, the air filling with the sharp stench of scorched metal. Streetlights shuddered, blinked twice, then vanished. An entire stretch of the old city fell into instant blackness. What followed wasn't calm. It was a silence that felt compressed, heavy, as if the night itself were holding its breath. Within that darkness stood the royal palace, home to the Green Vault. Not just a museum, but a fortress carved from centuries of intent. 300 years of stone, iron, and design dedicated to one purpose, guarding a treasure collection so rare it shaped European history itself. Its walls had outlasted wars, fires, revolutions. They were not built to fail. Klaus believed that. At 52, Klaus had walked these halls for over 15 years. He didn't think of himself as a guard in the ordinary sense. To him, this place was alive with memory, and his role was custodial, protecting the echo of kings and craftsmen long gone. Every night before work, he polished the brass buttons on his uniform until they caught the light just right. Order mattered. Precision mattered. Inside these walls, time felt obedient. Outside the palace, Klaus lived simply. A small apartment at the city's edge. A golden retriever named Max who waited faithfully by the door every afternoon at 3. Their walks lasted exactly 45 minutes, no more, no less. Dinner was modest. Coffee was strong and black. By evening, Klaus boarded the tram, thermos in hand, headed toward the palace lights. He was known for his calm. Cold never bothered him. Night shifts didn't wear him down. There was comfort in empty corridors and galleries stripped of visitors and noise. Shadows felt honest, predictable. His patrol inside the green vault never changed. Keys first, heavy iron, each one resting exactly where it belonged on his belt. Then the rooms, jewels, silver, bronze, always clockwise. Klaus knew the distance between display cases by heart, counted steps without thinking. He listened for the soft mechanical breathing of the climate system, a gentle hum that told him everything was stable. That sound meant safety. And on that fog-choked morning, just seconds after the city went dark, that hum vanished. For the first time in years, the palace felt wrong. The air was still, too still. For hours, everything had felt flawless. The kind of flawless that only exists when nothing has gone wrong yet. As Klaus moved through the galleries, his flashlight skimmed across treasures that once ruled empires, gold catching the beam, gemstones flashing like frozen fire. But he wasn't admiring them. That wasn't his job. His eyes tracked details others would miss. A scuffed tile, a shadow where dust shouldn't settle, a corner that felt too quiet. The objects mattered, yes, but the space around them mattered more. Every 60 minutes without fail, he returned to the booth. The ledger waited there, thick and heavy, its pages filled with years of steady handwriting. Klaus recorded the same truth again and again. All intact, all secure, nothing disturbed. The ritual grounded him. The palace walls were so massive they seemed to absorb sound itself. Klaus liked that. The silence felt earned, protected. Sometimes he paused before a single display, one pale stone that had once rested against royal skin. He always found it unsettling how such a small object could carry the weight of centuries. He'd straighten his cap, take a measured sip of coffee, and resume his route, slipping through the corridors like an afterthought. He tested doors by touch alone, leaning his weight into reinforced handles, feeling for the invisible resistance of locked systems. He passed rows of carved ivory figures that glowed faintly in the dark, their shapes almost human, almost watching. He knew every complaint the floors could make, every shift in air between old stone and newer walls. The work had a rhythm, a calm. He had done it so many times it felt less like duty and more like breathing. Then the world jolted. Inside the booth, the screen snapped from sharp color to lifeless gray in a blink. The lights flickered, then returned, but wrong, weak, yellowed. Like a sick room at midnight, Klaus stood instantly, pulse jumping. Across from him, his partner was already lifting the radio. The floor shuddered. Not violently, repeatedly. A deep, muted impact echoed through the stone, slow and deliberate, as if something massive was striking from far away, buried within the building itself. Klaus froze. That sound did not belong here. He grabbed his flashlight. The grip felt slick in his palm. As he stepped into the hallway, he noticed something else, subtle, unsettling. The air felt thinner, pressed, as though the room were exhaling and not breathing back in. There were no alarms, no sirens, no alerts. The systems designed to scream at the slightest threat remained silent. That silence was louder than anything else. Klaus moved toward the jewel room, boots cracking sharply against marble that suddenly felt unfamiliar. Each step echoed too long, too empty. As he turned the corner, the darkness ahead seemed deeper than it should have been. And for the first time in 15 years, Klaus felt the unmistakable sensation that the palace was no longer asleep. It was being entered. The beam of his flashlight sliced forward and caught something unnatural in the air, fine white dust drifting slowly, like snow that had lost its way. Then the shapes came into focus. Two men dressed head to toe in black, faces erased behind masks. They weren't whispering into earpieces or tapping at screens. No wires, no blinking lights. What they held was brutally simple, a long-handled axe, raised and brought down again and again with savage precision. Each strike landed in the exact same place on the display case, as if the glass had been studied, memorized, rehearsed. The cases were built to survive violence. That was their purpose. But knowledge is stronger than brute force. The final blow sent a tremor through the room so sharp Klaus felt it rattle his teeth. Then the glass failed, exploding outward in a cascading crash that sounded endless. The thieves didn't hesitate. Gloved hands plunged into history, scooping diamonds and rubies that had rested undisturbed for generations. Jewels that had outlived kingdoms vanished into fabric bags in seconds. Klaus stood frozen in the doorway. No weapon, no backup, just a flashlight trembling in his grip and a radio pressed against his chest. In front of him, two men breathing hard, fueled by adrenaline, wielding tools capable of turning reinforced glass into dust. The weight of the moment crashed over him. This wasn't property being taken. This was memory, identity, centuries being erased in real time. Fight and likely die for stones that were never his. Or survive and watch them disappear. Training answered before courage could argue. Klaus stayed where the shadows could still protect him. He raised the radio and spoke, his voice unsteady but clear, describing every detail he could force himself to notice. The men glanced his way once, just once, then bolted. They sprinted toward a narrow window already carved through iron bars hours earlier, slipping through it with practiced speed. By the time the echo of their footsteps faded, they were already gone, swallowed by fog, racing away in a car waiting beyond the palace walls. The damage was almost incomprehensible. 21 artifacts, thousands of diamonds, a fortune beyond counting. Numbers were assigned later, hundreds of millions, but to the country itself, the loss had no price tag. These weren't jewels, they were chapters of history. The hunt that followed stretched on for years. Endless footage reviewed, leads chased into dead ends. A criminal family surfaced in whispers, then headlines. Arrests finally came, trials followed. And then quietly, without cameras, a deal was made. Years after the night the lights went out under cover of darkness, a portion of the stolen treasure was returned. Not triumphantly, not completely, just enough to remind the world of what had been taken and what would never fully come back. Some secrets melt free with time. Others are only partially recovered, forever scarred by the moment someone was bold enough to break in. A single bag was delivered quietly to the authorities. Inside were most of the stolen jewels, heavy with history dulled by secrecy. But one absence screamed louder than everything returned. The most legendary piece of all, the pale diamond that had symbolized centuries of power, was gone. Not lost, withheld. A bargaining chip in a negotiation stripped of emotion and mercy. Klaus left his post not long after. He still keeps his routines, still walks his dog, Max, along familiar Dresden streets, still pauses at the same corners, but he never steps inside the palace again. The empty spaces behind the glass haunt him more than the night ever did. Where brilliance once rested, there is only absence, and in that absence, a weight he carries alone. The theft proved something uncomfortable. No vault is invincible. No wall is thick enough if someone is willing to use raw force and abandon restraint. Ancient violence had outmatched modern systems. Stone and glass fell to muscle and resolve. But even as that lesson settled, crime itself was already evolving. Far from Europe, across oceans and time zones, a very different kind of theft was taking shape. One that required no masks, no shattered windows, no alarms silenced. This new criminal wouldn't swing an axe. He wouldn't need to run. He would simply log in. Early in 2024, in a glass tower overlooking Hong Kong, a young man sat at a desk bathed in cool artificial light. Outside, the city pulsed, neon signs bleeding into humid night air, traffic humming like a living organism. Inside, the temperature was controlled, the scent of freshly brewed coffee lingering in the room. A video call notification blinked onto his screen. He had no idea it was about to redraw his future. We'll call him Kevin. In his early 30s, Kevin worked in the finance division of a global corporation so large it felt permanent. He was reliable to a fault, precise, quiet, the kind of employee who fixed problems before anyone noticed they existed. Numbers made sense to him. Systems felt safe, predictable. Kevin lived alone in a sleek apartment on the edge of the city. His evenings were spent mastering intricate strategy games or sharing unhurried meals with his parents every Sunday, honoring traditions he never questioned. He didn't chase risk. He avoided chaos. Facts, procedures, balance sheets. That was his world. And in just a few moments, all of it was about to be used against him. The train that vanished into the storm. Kevin built his life on caution, not the nervous kind, calculated, disciplined caution. The kind that checks balances every morning, files receipts with obsessive care, and never leaves loose ends behind. In a city that sprinted day and night, Kevin moved like a metronome, steady and dependable. At work, people liked him. They didn't know him deeply, but they trusted him. He respected structure, titles, chains of command, especially the executives far above him, operating from offices an ocean away. To Kevin, the company's top financial authority wasn't really a man at all, more an idea. A figure glimpsed only in polished videos and formal reports, distant and untouchable. Kevin took his role seriously. Managing even a tiny fraction of the company's money felt meaningful to him. He wasn't aiming to climb. He didn't want attention. Being one precise gear inside a massive system felt right, comforting even. His days unfolded with mechanical certainty. Every morning he arrived at exactly 8:45, a small paper bag in hand with one carefully chosen pastry. He sat down, adjusted his dual monitors until they lined up perfectly, and spent the first part of the day clearing out minor emails. An empty inbox gave him a strange sense of control, like resetting the world before it could surprise him. By mid-morning, the office filled with muted conversations and the soft percussion of typing. Kevin slipped on his headphones and vanished into numbers. Rows, columns, balances, millions moving silently under his watch. He handled them with clinical precision, pausing only to sip tea from the same ceramic mug he'd used for years. Lunch came at 12:50, never earlier, never late. He walked to the same noodle shop where no words were needed to place his order. He ate quickly, eyes drifting to traffic outside, then returned to his desk. The afternoon stretched long and dull. Forms, confirmations, cross-checks. Hours dissolved as his eyes strained and his focus narrowed. At 4 o'clock, he allowed himself one small pause. He rinsed his mug, stood by the window, and watched the harbor breathe for 5 quiet minutes. He thought about dinner, about the weekend, ordinary thoughts for an ordinary life. Then he went back to work. It was repetitive, It was calm, it was safe. And on that Friday afternoon, it was about to collapse. The first crack was barely noticeable. An email arrived at 4:32 p.m., slipping into his inbox just as Kevin reached for his bag, ready to end the day. Weekend. The subject line pulsed with urgency, flagged in red, demanding attention. It claimed to be from the company's top financial authority overseas. The message was brief, firm, and unsettling. A confidential transfer needed to happen immediately, large, discreet, and known only to a select inner circle. Kevin's instincts flared. Every training session he'd ever sat through warned about this exact pattern. Pressure, secrecy, money. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he began drafting a cautious reply, asking for confirmation, trying to slow the moment down. Before he could send it, another message arrived. A meeting request. A live video call. Same sender, same authority. Kevin's pulse climbed as his eyes scanned the attendee list. It wasn't just one executive. It was many legal leadership, regional oversight, names he recognized instantly. People who existed far above his pay grade. This wasn't a rogue email anymore. This was escalation. His chest tightened. He straightened his tie, smoothed his hair using the dark reflection of his screen, suddenly aware of how small he felt. Like a student called into an office he'd never imagined entering. He clicked the link. The meeting loaded. One by one, faces appeared. Relief washed over him, so fast it almost made him dizzy. There in the main window sat the financial chief himself, exactly as Kevin had seen him countless times before. Same posture, same composed expression, same glasses resting just so on his nose. Even the watch caught the light in a familiar way. The background was a polished office of dark wood and soft lighting, unmistakably executive. The other windows filled in around him, executives greeting one another, casual nods, a woman adjusting her headset, a man taking a sip of water while glancing at his notes, ordinary gestures, comforting ones. Normal. The lead executive looked straight into the camera, and then he said Kevin's name. The moment his name echoed through the speakers, Kevin felt it in his bones, a voice sharp, commanding, laced with that unmistakable British timbre he had heard in polished corporate videos countless times. The executive thanked him for joining at such short notice, and then with calm precision explained the stakes. Secrecy was absolute. One leak, one rumor, and the deal would collapse. Kevin straightened in his chair, spine rigid, nodding at every word, trying to anchor himself. Pride surged alongside a sudden, crushing pressure. He was being entrusted with a $25 million operation, a hidden maneuver few would ever glimpse. Sweat prickled under his collar. His mouth went dry. Then the instructions began, each step meticulously spelled out. Transfer this, verify that, confirm at every turn. The other executives chimed in, layering technical details and legal caveats, their eyes fixed on him through the screen. Kevin felt a vertigo unlike anything he had experienced, as if the room itself had tilted and time stretched around him. Every instinct told him this was real, every signal, every glance, every word. You are in that chair. You are staring into the faces of the people who steer your entire company. The reflections of office lights dance in their eyes. Their voices draw you in, measured, commanding. You are part of a mission that exists only in this fleeting, fragile moment. Do you pause and question reality? Or do you step forward, do your duty, and trust yourself? Kevin didn't hesitate. He leaned in, determined to be flawless. For the next hour, he executed every instruction with surgical precision. Funds moved in carefully calculated increments, routed to accounts scattered across the globe. Every click of the mouse sent a pulse of triumph through him. By the end of the call, $25 million had shifted from the company's Hong Kong reserves into destinations only the executives knew. He closed the laptop and sat back, chest still pounding. The office was silent. For a long while, he simply breathed, letting the enormity of what he had done settle. Exhaustion washed over him, but beneath it, a fierce sense of accomplishment. He had navigated the most intense, high-pressure scenario of his career and emerged intact. That night he slept like a man who had scaled an invisible summit. Dreams of recognition and approval filled his mind. In his imagination, he saw the nods, the praise, the acknowledgement he had longed for. He believed, for the first time, that he had been welcomed into the rarefied inner circle of power. But the revelation, bizarre, unthinkable, and utterly shattering, was still waiting. The office felt different that morning. Kevin brought it up casually, just a quick mention of the transfer to someone who'd been right there on the call. But the look on his colleague's face stopped him cold. Not agreement, not recognition, just blank confusion. His stomach twisted. Something was wrong. He went straight to London, skipped the chain of command, called the head office directly. Within the hour, the floor dropped out from under him. There had been no acquisition, no confidential deal, no emergency meeting at all. The CFO, he'd been in a completely different room that entire day, face to face with real people, nowhere near a screen. Kevin's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't been speaking to his executives. He'd been speaking to something else entirely. Every face on that call, the CFO, the legal director, the entire senior team, none of them had been real. They were constructs, digital forgeries, AI-driven illusions so flawless they fooled a trained finance professional for over an hour. The criminals had mapped real faces onto fabricated performances, cloned voices down to the inflection, even rebuilt the London office down to the lighting on the walls. Kevin had sat across from a room full of ghosts made of code. And the money, gone. $25 million dissolved into a labyrinth of offshore accounts, untraceable, unreachable. Hong Kong authorities threw everything they had at it. But the people behind this, they were shadows, operating through encryption so deep, so layered that no one could touch them. Kevin's world, built on logic, on verification, on trust in what he could see, shattered. He became the symbol of a nightmare no one wanted to admit was possible, that reality itself could be forged, that your eyes could lie to you. He lost everything, his career, his reputation. The company ripped apart its entire security infrastructure trying to prevent it from happening again. The case became a chilling lesson to the world. The most dangerous weapon isn't something you can hold in your hand. It's the power to make you believe in something that never existed. But while Kevin was drowning in a sea of digital deception, halfway across the world, another man was about to step into a mystery far stranger. This man wasn't being tricked by a screen. He was surrounded by real people, real voices, real walls. He walked into a bar in the middle of a crowded city, security cameras everywhere, witnesses on all sides. He stepped through a door that dozens of people saw him enter. And then, in a building with no other exit, in front of a room full of eyes, he vanished. Not his money, not his reputation. Him, completely. It was late on the night of March 31st, 2006, when a 27-year-old named Brian Schaffer pushed open the door to a packed bar in Columbus, Ohio. Outside, the air was sharp and cool, spring just beginning to settle in. But inside, the atmosphere was thick with warmth, noise, and energy, laughter, the sharp scent of beer and grease hanging in the air. Brian Schaffer was tall, easy on the eyes, and had the kind of future people envied. Tonight, he just wanted to unwind, celebrate, let loose before spring break kicked in. He was in his second year of med school at Ohio State, the type who aced everything but never made you feel small for it. People were drawn to him. When Brian talked to you, it felt like you were the only person who mattered. Neighbors knew him as the guy who always smiled, always waved, the kind of person you'd want in your corner. But beneath the surface, he was carrying something heavy. Just 3 weeks earlier, his mother, Renee, had died. Cancer. It had torn through his family like a storm, and Brian was still trying to hold it together for his dad, Randy, for his younger brother, Derek. He didn't let the grief show much, but it was there. Quiet, constant. He had a girlfriend, Alexis. They were solid, close. Word around his circle was that he was planning to propose soon, maybe on their upcoming trip to Miami. Brian wasn't the party-hard type. He liked Jimmy Buffett, dreamed about beaches and palm trees and a life far from the cold Ohio nights. He was grounded, focused, responsible, the kind of guy who studied hard and kept his head down. But tonight he just crushed his final exams. The quarter was over. He had a flight to catch soon, a girlfriend waiting, and a week of freedom ahead of him. So yeah, he wanted to cut loose, just a little. He started the night at a place called the Ugly Tuna Saloona, tucked inside the South Campus Gateway complex. Around 9 p.m., he met up with his friend William. They grabbed a spot at the bar, ordered a round, and just talked. Plans for the week, life, nothing heavy. Brian was smiling, relaxed. The bar was filling up fast, students everywhere, music thumping. It felt normal, safe, like any other Friday night. After about an hour, they decided to keep moving, hit a few more spots, see where the night took them. They walked through the well-lit streets of Columbus, bar hopping like everyone else. At each place, Brian fell into the same rhythm. Order a drink, find a quieter corner, check his phone for messages from Alexis. He liked routine, liked knowing where he stood. He was predictable that way. And that's what made what happened next so impossible to explain. He liked being around people, but he wasn't the loudest in the room. He just showed up, present, grounded. By midnight, they'd hit 3, maybe 4 different bars. Brian was drinking, sure, but he wasn't sloppy. No stumbling, no slurred words, just riding the vibe of the night, soaking in the energy around him. Eventually, they ran into another friend, Meredith. The 3 of them decided to loop back to where it all started, the Ugly Tuna Saloon. There was a live band wrapping up their set, and they wanted to catch the tail end before the night died out. They got back to the Gateway complex around 1:15 a.m. April 1st. Technically, it was already tomorrow. To reach the bar, you had to ride a long escalator up to the 2nd floor. The Ugly Tuna was sprawling, big patio out back, a main stage up front, always packed. Brian, William, and Meredith stepped off the escalator, past the security guard at the door without issue. Brian even waved at a few familiar faces on the way in. Inside, the band was mid-song, some 80s cover that had the dance floor moving. Bodies everywhere, heat, noise, energy. They found a spot near the edge of the floor. Brian leaned against a pillar, watching it all unfold with that quiet little smile he had. He looked peaceful, content even. At some point, he drifted toward the patio entrance, started chatting with a couple of women who knew the band. Nothing unusual, just small talk. His friends saw him there, laughing, relaxed. That was the last time anyone who knew Brian Schaffer ever saw him. Just a normal moment, a throwaway conversation in a sea of noise. The clock kept moving. 2 a.m. rolled around closing time. The house lights came up, harsh and fluorescent, exposing sticky floors and half-empty glasses scattered everywhere. The music cut out. In its place, the low hum of hundreds of people shuffling toward the exits, draining their drinks, grabbing jackets, heading home. It was controlled chaos, the same scene that played out every weekend at the Ugly Tuna. William and Meredith stood near the exit, waiting for Brian to catch up. They figured he'd hit the bathroom, maybe got caught in the crowd. No big deal. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The bar was nearly empty now. Security was sweeping the floor, herding out the last few stragglers toward the escalator. William pulled out his phone, called Brian. Straight to voicemail. Weird but not alarming, not yet. They figured he'd just left without saying anything. Maybe got tired, headed home early. It was out of character, but people do strange things when they're tired and buzzed. So they left. The next morning, the first crack appeared. Alexis called Brian to talk about their flight to Miami. No answer. She tried again an hour later, then again. Still nothing. That wasn't like him. Brian never ignored her calls, especially not when they had a flight to catch. She reached out to his dad, Randy. He hadn't heard from him either. By Saturday evening, unease had hardened into something worse. Panic. Brian Schaffer was gone. When the police got involved, they went straight to the security footage. The Ugly Tuna Saloon had one major advantage for an investigation like this. There was only one public way in and out, the escalator. That was it. There was a service exit in the back, sure, but it opened into an active construction zone. Hard to navigate, dangerous even, and more importantly, also covered by cameras. The cops sat down and started watching. They expected this to be quick. Just find the moment Brian left with everyone else and work backward from there. Easy. Except it wasn't. They found him on the footage arriving at 1:15 a.m. with William and Meredith, clear as day. Then, at 1:55 a.m., there he was again, standing just outside the bar entrance, talking to those two women. Casual, relaxed. Then he turned around, walked back inside. That was it. The investigators kept watching, frame by frame, every person who left that night, every face, every jacket, every movement. They saw William and Meredith leave. They saw the band pack up their gear and haul it down the escalator. They saw the cleaning crew come in after close. But Brian, nothing. He walked back into that bar and never walked out. The police were stunned. They checked the construction area, thinking maybe he'd wandered out the service door and gotten hurt, fell, got disoriented, something. Nothing. They brought in search dogs. The dogs couldn't pick up a trail leading away from the building. It didn't make sense. Imagine you're standing in that bar after the lights come up. Empty chairs, sticky floors, the faint smell of old beer still hanging in the air. You know there's only one exit. You know cameras are watching every inch of it. You see a man walk into a room, and you know beyond any doubt that he never came back out. So what do you believe? That he found some hidden passage no one else knew about? Some secret door that bypassed every camera, every witness, every logical explanation? Or do you believe something far worse happened in the shadows, something no one saw coming? The most disturbing part of this case isn't what was found. It's what wasn't. No struggle, no blood, no shouts, no witness who saw anything out of place. Brian's phone, days later it pinged a cell tower miles away from the bar, but it led nowhere. No answers, just another dead end. Story 2. The town burning beneath your feet. Losing his mother had shattered him, but running away, that didn't fit. He had a vacation booked, a future in medicine waiting for him, and a ring, one he was almost certainly planning to slip onto Alexis's finger. He had every reason to stay, and no way to leave. What followed was a cascade of heartbreak for the Schaffer family. Brian's father, Randy, never stopped searching. He spent years chasing leads, following tips, hopping for a phone call that never came. 2 years later, he was killed in a freak accident. A tree collapsed on him during a storm. Just like that, he was gone too. Brian's brother, Derek, was left behind, the last one standing, the sole survivor of a family torn apart by grief and unanswered questions. To this day, the case remains unsolved. The man who walked into a bar and never walked out is still one of Ohio's most baffling mysteries. Brian Schaffer's disappearance is a chilling reminder that you can be surrounded by people, by noise, by cameras, and still vanish without a trace. Still be utterly, completely alone in your final moments. It was a locked room mystery with no key, no solution, just silence. But while Brian disappeared inside walls he couldn't escape, another man was about to be swallowed by a place with no walls at all. A place where the only borders were sand, where the only exit was survival or death. This man was an athlete, a runner who knew how to push his body past its breaking point. He entered the vast, merciless belly of the Sahara Desert for a race, armed with confidence, training, and gear he trusted. But he was about to learn something the desert teaches everyone eventually. When it decides to hide you, it doesn't need cameras. It doesn't need locked doors or construction zones. It just needs one gust of wind and 9 days of silence. April 1994. Mauro Prosperi stood at the starting line of the Marathon des Sables in Morocco. The air was already scorching, pushing past 100 degrees, and it carried the smell of ancient rock and sun-baked dust. He adjusted the straps on his pack, felt the sweat already forming along his spine. Hundreds of other runners surrounded him, but somehow the horizon felt like it was staring only at him. The Sahara at mid-morning is blinding, a world painted in shades of yellow and burnt orange. No shade, no mercy. The wind hits your face like the exhaust from an oven. As Mauro started running, the only sounds were the crunch of his shoes on the cracked earth and the quiet slosh of water in his canteen. It was beautiful, and it was terrifying. The heat shimmered off the ground, bending the distant mountains into warped, liquid shadows. Mauro Prosperi was an Italian police officer, a world-class pentathlete, a man carved from discipline and raw endurance. He was the real deal, an elite who didn't just compete, he dominated. Back in Sicily, he had a wife, 3 young kids, a life built on routine and discipline. His days revolved around training for the kind of races that break most people before they even start. Mauro wasn't doing this for fun. This was his identity. He knew how to manage pain, how to push through exhaustion when his body begged him to stop. He had a quiet, unshakable confidence, the kind you only get from years of testing your limits and coming out the other side. Every morning at 5 a.m., without fail, he'd run 20 miles before his shift at the police station even began. He had a specific breathing technique, inhaling through his nose to conserve moisture, something he'd perfected over months of brutal training in the Mediterranean heat. People in his town saw him as a symbol, the guy who never quit, the one who could outlast anyone. And when it came to the Sahara, he felt ready, more than ready. His routine during the marathon was surgical in its precision. He'd wake at dawn in the shared tent, stretching out the stiffness from the night before. Then he'd check his gear, compass, flare gun, food rations, making sure everything was balanced perfectly in his pack. He'd slather anti-chafing cream on his feet and thighs, a small, unglamorous ritual. But out here, it was the difference between finishing and collapsing. Then came the run. He didn't think about the full 250 kilometers. That number was too big, too crushing. Instead, he focused on the next 5 miles. Pick a rock, a ridge, a distant shadow in the sand, run to it, then pick another. It became rhythmic, almost meditative. Every 20 minutes, he'd take a tiny sip of water, just enough to wet his tongue, roll it around his mouth before swallowing, make it last. This was his world for 6 days. The race was broken into stages and Mauro was crushing it. Top 10, moving with a steady, relentless pace that chewed through the miles like clockwork. He loved the solitude out here, the way the vastness made everything else, his worries, his stress, feel small, insignificant. He'd spend hours lost in thought, picturing his kids' faces, the taste of his wife's pasta waiting for him back home in Sicily. Those images kept him moving. As he ran, he followed the trail markers, white stones and flags left by the race organizers. At every checkpoint, he'd verify his coordinates, check his map, cross-reference everything with professional precision. He respected the desert, but he didn't fear it. As long as he stuck to his training, kept his head clear, and followed the plan, he'd be fine. At least that's what he believed. The suffering, the heat, the thirst, the blisters tearing at his skin had become almost normal, familiar even, a companion he'd learned to tolerate. But on the fourth day, something changed. It was the longest stage of the race, the hardest, and around mid-afternoon, Morrow noticed the horizon starting to blur. A strange, hazy yellow cloud was rising in the distance, moving fast, too fast. The wind, which had been steady all day, suddenly turned chaotic, swirling, unpredictable. He felt grit scraping against his teeth, a sharp sting on his skin. At first, he thought it was just a gust. He pulled his scarf over his nose and mouth and kept going, trying to hold his pace. But within minutes, the sun disappeared. The world turned a dark, sickly orange. The wind became a roar, like standing next to a jet engine. The sand thickened until he couldn't see his own hands in front of his face. A cold spike of fear shot through him. He was in the middle of a sandstorm. He knew the protocol: stop, wait it out, don't move. But the wind was so violent, it was literally knocking him off his feet. He found a shallow dip in the sand and curled into it, pulling his jacket over his head. The sand started piling against his body, burying him. He could feel it pressing down, suffocating. He stayed there for 6 hours, listening to the desert howl. When the wind finally died, the silence was almost worse. He stood up, shook the sand off, looked around. Everything was gone. The trail, the flags, the white stones, all of it buried under fresh dunes. Morrow pulled out his compass. The needle spun uselessly. The iron-rich rocks in the area had thrown it off completely. He turned in a slow circle, 360 degrees of nothing, just sand, just sky, and a sickening drop in his stomach. He didn't know which way was north. Worse, he didn't know where the next water station was. His heart wasn't just beating. It was slamming against his ribs like it was trying to break free. His throat felt raw, scraped. He reached for his canteen and felt the terrifying lightness of it in his hand. Less than half a liter left. He knew the math. In this heat, a man has maybe 24 hours without water, maybe less. His legs felt like lead. His mind raced through every survival manual he'd ever read. He was alone. Completely alone. The next 3 days unraveled into something out of a fever dream. He stumbled across a small abandoned shrine, a stone hut sitting in the middle of absolute nothingness. It gave him shade, but no water. To survive, he did the unthinkable. He caught bats roosting in the rafters, wrung their necks, and drank their blood to stay alive. He found snakes, ate them raw. His body was eating itself from the inside, muscle burning away with every step through the furnace. His skin turned charred and cracked like ancient leather, his eyes swollen and bloodshot from the relentless glare of the sun. At one point, he saw a plane in the distance. His heart jumped. He grabbed his flare gun, fired it into the sky. The tiny spark of light disappeared into the vastness. The pilot never saw him. A crushing wave of despair washed over him. He pulled out a scrap of paper, wrote a final note to his wife, told her he loved her, that he was sorry he wouldn't be coming home, that he wouldn't get to see their children grow up. Picture it. You're sitting in that stone hut, no water, your body shutting down. You're hundreds of miles from anyone who could help. You look down at your wrists, and for a moment you wonder if it would be easier to just end it, right here, right now, rather than face another day of being slowly roasted alive under the sun. You're a world-class athlete, and you've lost everything. So what do? Do you stay in the shade and wait for the end to come? Or do you stand up on your blistered, bleeding feet and walk until your heart finally gives out in the sand? Morrow chose to walk. He decided that if he was going to die, he was going to die moving toward home. He started a slow, agonizing trek across the desert, mostly at night when the temperature dropped just enough to keep him conscious. He followed the distant mountains, hopping, praying they'd lead him to a river, a road, anything. He was running on pure instinct now, his brain fogged by dehydration, his thoughts fragmenting. He started seeing things that weren't there. Water, green trees. They'd shimmer on the horizon just out of reach, and the moment he got close, they'd vanish. Then on the 8th day, something changed. Morrow crested a high dune, and on the horizon he saw a thin line of green. He thought it was another hallucination, another cruel trick. But as he got closer, he smelled something he hadn't smelled in over a week. Wet earth. He found it a small oasis, muddy puddles of water. He threw himself into the mud, drank until his body rejected it, vomited, drank again. A few miles later, he spotted movement. A young girl, nomadic, tending a flock of goats. She saw him and ran, screaming. Morrow looked like death itself, his face blackened by the sun, his body skeletal, barely human. The girl came back, this time with elders from her tribe. They realized what he was, a lost traveler, barely alive. They gave him goat's milk, tea, small sips at first, then more. Eventually, the military arrived. That's when Morrow learned the truth. He had walked nearly 300 kilometers off course. He'd crossed the border from Morocco into a remote, forgotten corner of the Algerian desert. He'd lost 33 pounds. His liver was permanently damaged. It took months just to stand without shaking. But here's the wildest part. 2 years later, Morrow went back. He returned to Morocco, and he finished the Marathon des Sables. He said he had to face the desert again, to prove it hadn't broken him. He's a legend now, the man who was swallowed by the Sahara and walked back out alive. Morrow Prosperi's story is a testament to the absolute edge of human endurance, the will to survive when every logical part of you says to give up. He faced a natural fortress, and he won. But while Morrow was fighting for his life in the sand, a woman in California was building a different kind of empire. She wasn't fighting the heat. She was fighting the truth. And she was about to learn that a desert built on lies can be just as deadly as the Sahara when the sun finally comes up. May 2023. A black sedan pulled up to the heavy steel gates of a federal prison camp in Bryan, Texas. The air was thick, humid, the smell of damp earth mixing with diesel exhaust from the nearby highway. A woman stepped out. Simple sweatshirt, jeans, nothing flashy. A far cry from the black turtlenecks and designer slacks she used to wear on the covers of every major business magazine in the world. She looked up at the barbed wire, the gray concrete walls, her new home. This was the final stop on a journey that had started with a revolutionary promise, a vision to change the world with a single drop of blood. Elizabeth Holmes, once hailed as the youngest self-made female billionaire in history, now just another number in the federal system. She walked toward the processing center, footsteps crunching on gravel, leaving her old life behind with every step. Elizabeth Holmes was 19 years old, and she dropped out of Stanford. Brilliant student, intense stare that seemed to look straight through you. She wasn't a criminal back then, not a con artist. She was a visionary. And she had a fear, a deep personal fear. Needles, a common phobia, but for her it became the spark for something bigger. She founded a company called the Ranos. The goal: make blood testing as easy and painless as a small tap on your fingertip. She spoke in a deep, authoritative baritone, a voice that commanded every room she walked into, a voice that made investors feel safe, confident, like they were in the presence of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Elizabeth lived modestly, worked 20-hour days, didn't care about clothes or parties or anything that didn't serve the mission. People who met her were captivated. She wasn't just passionate, she was magnetic. She became the anchor of normalcy in a chaotic tech world. A young woman who seemed to have discovered the holy grail of modern medicine. Inside the Ranos headquarters in Palo Alto, life was a high-pressure machine. Hundreds of employees showed up before sunrise, walking through security checkpoints that required biometric scans and multiple key card swipes. The office smelled like expensive floor wax and the faint metallic tang of a sterile lab. It was an environment built on extreme secrecy, every hallway monitored, every conversation controlled. Engineers and lab technicians spent thousands of hours staring at a small black box. The Edison. This was the centerpiece, the crown jewel, the machine designed to perform hundreds of medical tests using just a tiny drop of blood. The technicians followed strict protocol, loading small plastic containers, nanotainers, into the machine, pressing a button on the touchscreen, waiting for the software to process the data. It was slow, mechanical, repetitive. They'd watch the progress bar creep from 5% to 10%, listen to the faint whir of internal fans, the clicking of robotic arms inside the box. When the test finished, they'd print the report, file it in a secure cabinet. Hundreds of times a day, every single day. It was mundane, grinding, soul-crushing work. But it was supposed to be the foundation of a healthcare revolution for all humanity. Management demanded cult-like devotion to the Edison. Employees were pushed to work until they collapsed. They ate at their desks, surrounded by lines of code and technical manuals. No windows in the main lab. Time lost all meaning. You only knew it was night when the security guards changed shifts. It was a world of intense, suffocating focus, where the only thing that mattered was making the black box work perfectly. But here's the thing. It didn't work. The cracks started to show in a quiet corner of the lab. A young scientist named Erica Chung was processing quality control data, and she started noticing something off. The numbers coming out of the Edison didn't add up. She'd run a test on a control sample, something with a known, fixed amount of sugar. The machine should give the same result every time. But it didn't. It gave a different result every single time. And these weren't small variations. These were massive, dangerous discrepancies. The kind that could change a diagnosis. The kind that could kill someone. Erica brought the data to her supervisors. She figured it was a software glitch, something fixable. But instead of fixing it, they told her to ignore it. They instructed her to delete the results that didn't fit. Only report the ones that made the machine look accurate. A small, quiet manipulation of the truth. And it started happening every day. The air in the lab shifted, heavier now, thick with a tension no one would name out loud. Another whistleblower, Tyler Schultz, noticed the Edison breaking down constantly during investor demos. He watched his colleagues scrambling behind closed doors, frantically trying to repair the machines, while Elizabeth stood in the hallway, pitching the future of medicine to rooms full of generals and billionaires. The gap between what the company was claiming and what the machines were actually doing grew wider with every passing day. Now imagine this. You're a patient sitting in a brightly lit pharmacy. You've been feeling tired lately, nothing serious, just off. You decide to try the new Theranos blood test. It's cheap, it's fast, why not? 2 days later, you get a notification on your phone. Your blood work shows you're in the middle of a massive medical crisis. Your heart slams against your ribs. Cold sweat breaks out across your forehead. Your hands start shaking uncontrollably. You rush to the nearest emergency room, your mind racing with thoughts of your family, everything you haven't done yet, everything you'll miss. You're terrified, convinced you're dying, because a multi-billion-dollar company told you so. The doctors at the hospital run their own tests, traditional methods, real equipment. An hour later, they come back. You're perfectly healthy. The fear you felt, that was real. But the data that caused it, a complete and total fabrication. The physical toll of that terror doesn't just disappear. Your throat stays tight for days. You can't sleep, can't think straight. Living above the inferno. You keep replaying it in your mind. How could a machine be so wrong? How could something trusted by doctors, by pharmacies, by the system itself, betray you like that? It wasn't just a glitch. It wasn't just bad code. It was your life. And for a moment, you thought it was ending. That kind of fear doesn't wash away with good news. It lingers. It changes you. You feel a deep, gnawing sense of betrayal, like the very foundation of medicine, something you're supposed to trust without question, has been corrupted. This wasn't a mistake in a video game. This wasn't a bug in an app. This was a mistake with your life. And somewhere in a sleek glass building in Palo Alto, someone knew. They knew the machine didn't work. And they let you use it anyway. You realized the truth in that moment. You weren't a patient. You were a data point in an experiment that was never designed to work for you in the first place. Now imagine you're a young scientist, entry level, working at a company valued at $9 billion. And you're holding evidence in your hands. Evidence that the technology is a fraud, that people are being hurt, that the whole thing is a lie. You also know that if you speak up, the company's legal team will come for you. They'll hunt you down, destroy your reputation, bury you. You see Elizabeth Holmes on magazine covers, praised as a visionary, surrounded by some of the most powerful people in government. So what do? Stay silent. or risk everything to tell the truth. For Tyler Schultz, the choice was even harder, because speaking up meant going against his own grandfather, a member of the Theranos board. He was followed by private investigators, threatened with lawsuits that would have bankrupted him for life. He spent nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if maybe he was the one who was crazy. But he couldn't live with the lie anymore. He realized something crucial. The silence of the employees was the only thing keeping the entire house of cards from collapsing. And when the truth finally came out, it was far worse than anyone had imagined. The Edison machine, the centerpiece of the entire operation, was essentially a hollow shell. A beautiful piece of industrial design that was physically incapable of performing the tests it promised. To keep the scam alive, the Ranos had built a secret room deep inside headquarters. When a patient's blood arrived from a pharmacy, it was taken into that room, quietly, out of sight. And then it was run on standard, large-scale machines, the kind made by established companies, the exact machines the Ranos claimed to be replacing. They were literally taking the blood out of the tiny Theranos containers, diluting it so there was enough to use, and running it through conventional equipment. They had created high-tech theater, a performance designed to fool the world. Elizabeth Holmes had built a $9 billion empire on the back of other people's inventions, all while claiming she had discovered a miracle. It was a deception so bold, so total, that it seemed impossible to believe. Until it wasn't. Elizabeth Holmes was eventually convicted of 4 counts of wire fraud. In late 2025, her final legal attempts to stay out of prison were rejected. The court shut the door. She's now serving an 11-year sentence. A cautionary tale for a Silicon Valley culture that, too, often rewards people for faking it until they make it. The company that was supposed to save the world, it's a ghost now. Its name synonymous with one of the greatest frauds in modern history. But while Elizabeth was building her desert of lies in the world of high finance, a group of real-world criminals was about to be trapped by a truth they never saw coming. These men thought they were using a communication app that was untouchable, invisible to the laws of every nation. They were moving tons of narcotics, planning violent hits, all with a single tap on a screen. But they were about to learn something terrifying. The person on the other end of the line. It was the law itself. This global network of syndicates had paid thousands of dollars for special phones they believed were unhackable. They felt like gods, operating in the shadows with total impunity. They had no idea that the very network they trusted was a masterfully crafted trap. An operation that didn't just break the code of the underworld. It rewrote the rules of the game entirely, turning every encrypted message into a breadcrumb trail that led straight to a prison cell. Early 2024, a man sat in a dimly lit apartment in a quiet suburb of Sydney, Australia. The only light came from the small glowing screen of a custom-built smartphone. The air was cool. The faint scent of expensive leather and cleaning supplies hung in the room. He tapped a sequence of numbers into the keypad. The screen flashed a deep, ghostly blue. Then it opened a messaging app. An app that officially did not exist. Let's call him Anthony. 38 years old. A life built on extreme, calculated privacy. He wasn't a famous fugitive, wasn't a street-level dealer. He was what the underworld calls a broker. a professional middleman, someone who facilitated the movement of goods across borders for people who never wanted their names written on paper. But to the outside world, Anthony was a family man, took his kids to soccer practice, paid his lawnmower in cash. To his neighbors, he was a successful tech consultant who worked from home and traveled occasionally for business. Polite, quiet, distant. The kind of guy who'd hold the door for you at the grocery store, but would never invite you over for a barbecue. He was the anchor of normalcy in his quiet neighborhood. A man whose life seemed built on a foundation of boring, middle-class stability and a very strict adherence to routine. Anthony's mundane routine started every morning at exactly 6:50. He'd make a cup of black tea, sit at his kitchen table, watch the news on a television with the volume turned almost all the way down. He liked the quiet. Then he'd spend 30 minutes checking the physical security of his home. Every window, every lock, every camera lens, making sure they were clear of spider webs. It was repetitive, boring, something he'd done thousands of times. Then came the real work. He'd go to his home office and open a small lead-lined safe hidden behind a false panel in his desk. Inside were 5 identical smartphones. These weren't normal phones. You couldn't buy them at a store. They were ghost phones. Each one cost several $1,000s, required a monthly subscription to a secret encrypted network. Anthony would spend hours every day managing these devices, checking signal strength, verifying connections, making sure everything was secure. He'd coordinate shipments of specialized equipment, typing out messages in a shorthand code that only a few people in the world understood. He'd wait for the little green light to blink, confirming his message had been received and read. Then he'd use a specific feature that remotely wiped the message from both devices after exactly 60 seconds. It was a slow, methodical dance of digital ghosts, and Anthony found a deep sense of peace in it. His afternoons were spent driving to different parts of the city, meeting clients. These meetings always happened in busy public places, a crowded park, a noisy food court. Anthony never carried more than one phone at a time. He'd sit on a bench, wait for a specific person to sit next to him. They'd exchange a few brief sentences about nothing. Then he'd hand over a small padded envelope. Inside, a newly activated ghost device. The process of activating a new phone was a ritual, precise, almost sacred. Anthony would enter a complex series of administrative passwords to register the device on the global ghost server. He'd test the emergency burn feature, a specific PIN that, if entered, would instantly delete every single piece of data on the phone if the police ever came knocking. He took immense pride in this, in providing his clients with total, absolute safety. This was a life built on belief. Belief that the digital world could be a fortress. Anthony believed that as long as he followed the rules and used the right technology, he was invisible, untouchable. He watched the news, saw stories of criminals getting caught, busted by sloppy mistakes, poor security, and he felt superior because he knew better. He had the system figured out, or so he thought. He was a professional, a ghost, and for 3 years, he operated with the confidence of a man who believed he could never, ever be caught. Then on a Tuesday afternoon in August, something shifted. Anthony was sitting in his car, waiting for a client to arrive at a suburban train station. He opened his Ghost app to check a message. And for the first time in 3 years, the screen hung on the loading icon. It was a tiny delay, maybe 5 seconds at most. But to a man like Anthony, it felt like an eternity. A small, cold spark of unease flickered in the back of his mind. He closed the app, restarted the phone. Everything seemed fine after that. But an hour later, he noticed something else. A message he'd sent was still on the screen. The automatic burn feature, the one that was supposed to delete the text after 60 seconds, had failed. Anthony stared at the words on the screen. His heart skipped a beat. This was a critical failure. He contacted the app's technical support. For the first time ever, he received no reply. Over the next few days, more small things started going wrong. Several of his high-level clients went silent, their accounts appearing as inactive on the network. He heard rumors of a major shipment being seized in Europe, even though the coordinates had been shared over the encrypted Ghost platform. The air in Anthony's office began to feel heavy, stagnant, like the walls were slowly closing in. He stopped sleeping, jumped at every noise outside. He spent his nights staring at the 5 phones on his desk, waiting for them to tell him what was happening. He felt like he was standing on a frozen lake, and somewhere in the distance, he could hear the ice cracking. He considered using the master burn pin, the nuclear option, the one that would destroy his entire network in an instant. But he hesitated. He was afraid of losing the thousands of dollars in subscription fees he'd already collected. He convinced himself it was just a technical glitch, a server issue. It would pass. Then at 4:00 in the morning, sitting in his dark office, something happened. Every single one of the 5 phones on his desk vibrated. At the exact same time, Anthony's stomach dropped. He looked at the screens. A message was being broadcast to every user on the network. It wasn't a code. It wasn't a technical update. It was a message from the police. His mind raced. Run for the door, or reach for the burn pin. Anthony reached for the pin, his fingers shaking so hard he could barely hit the numbers. He typed the final digit, but the screen didn't go black. Instead, a large official logo appeared. Frozen in place, a wave of nausea crashed over him. His stomach felt like it had turned to stone. Before he could even stand, he heard it. The sound of a heavy battering ram slamming into his front door, with a force that shook the entire house. Glass shattered, heavy boots thundered through the quiet hallway. Anthony dropped to his knees, hands behind his head. The room flooded with blinding white light from tactical flashlights. He felt the cold steel of handcuffs ratcheting around his wrists. The metal bit into his skin. His throat was so dry he couldn't speak, couldn't even ask what was happening. He just watched as the officers began bagging the phones he'd spent years protecting. The real revelation came later. During the interrogation at the Australian Federal Police headquarters, Anthony sat in a small, windowless room, waiting for them to ask how they cracked the encryption. He was ready to stay silent, but the lead detective walked in, sat down, and pushed a laptop toward him. On the screen, the administrative back end of the Ghost app. The police hadn't hacked the network from the outside. They were the ones running it. For nearly 2 years, The Ghost encrypted platform had been a masterfully crafted honeypot. The original developer of the app had been identified early on, flipped by the police. And instead of shutting the network down, the authorities let it grow. They watched in real time as the world's most dangerous criminals shared their secrets. Every shipment, every hit, every bank account. All logged, all documented. And the criminals, they paid for the privilege. Anthony sat there stunned. Every secure message he'd ever sent, just another piece of evidence for the prosecution. The police had even controlled the burn feature, choosing which messages to delete to keep users from getting suspicious. It was the ultimate digital double-cross. Operation Ghost resulted in dozens of arrests across 4 continents, thousands of kilograms of narcotics seized, violent crimes prevented before they could even be carried out. Anthony was eventually sentenced to 15 years in a federal prison. His life of stability and soccer practices over, replaced by a concrete cell in a number. He had believed he was a ghost, but he was really just a passenger on a train the police had been driving the entire time. The fortress he thought he'd built for his clients. It was actually a cage, and the key had been in the hands of the Australian Federal Police the entire time. The takedown of Operation Ghost proved something chilling. In the modern world, there is no such thing as absolute digital privacy. Even the most sophisticated encryption can be defeated if the people providing the service are the ones wearing the badges. It was a massive victory for global law enforcement. A reminder that the shadows are never as dark as they seem. But while Anthony was losing his freedom to a digital trap, a different kind of thief was preparing a heist. This thief didn't need to sell phones or build an app. He didn't even need to be in the same country as his victims. He was looking for a bridge, not one made of stone or steel, but a bridge made of code, connecting 2 different digital worlds. And he was about to pull off a heist so massive it would fund the secret ambitions of an entire nation, moving $600 million in the blink of an eye, while the world watched in horror. Final days of March 2022. A young software engineer sat in a brightly lit, modern office in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. The air was cool, smelled faintly of high-end air fresheners and the bitter edge of matcha tea. Outside, the city was chaos, a sea of motorbikes and humidity. But inside, everything was digital, clean, worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He was about to check a dashboard that should have been perfectly quiet. Let's call him Vin, 29 years old, one of the brilliant minds behind Sky Mavis, the company that created Axie Infinity, a blockchain game that had taken the world by storm. Vin was a master of code, a man who lived in a world of logic, cryptography, and decentralized finance. He was a rising star in the tech world, someone who felt like he was building the future of the internet, one block at a time. Vin was quiet, intensely focused. He lived in a sleek apartment overlooking the Saigon River, spent his weekends either hiking in the mountains or reading dense technical white papers about the latest security protocols. He wasn't interested in fame or fast cars. He was interested in the elegance of a perfect system. He was the anchor for his team, the person they went to when a complex problem needed a calm, methodical solution. A creature of habit. Every morning at precisely 7:45, he'd walk into the office, nod to the security guard, grab a coffee, sit down at his workstation, and check the dashboard. He liked the process, the mechanical sound of the machine grinding the beans, a small, tactile rhythm to start his day. Then he'd sit at his desk, meticulously organized, 3 monitors perfectly aligned, and begin his deep work session. Vin's daily routine was a marathon of digital maintenance. He was responsible for monitoring the Ronin network, a custom-built bridge that allowed players to move their digital assets between the game and the Ethereum blockchain. It was a massive responsibility. Every day, he'd log into the validator nodes, check the health of the servers, scroll through thousands of lines of logs, hunting for any tiny error that might signal a bug. He'd spend hours verifying transaction speeds, gas fees, making sure the bridge was operating at peak efficiency. It was repetitive, grueling, staring at flickering green text on a black background for 10 hours a day. He'd take a small sip of cold tea every 15 minutes, never taking his eyes off the screen for long. He found a strange kind of peace in the predictability of it all, in the code he'd helped write. By mid-afternoon, the office would hum with activity. But Vin stayed in his own silent bubble. He'd run stress tests on the network, simulating thousands of simultaneous users to make sure the bridge wouldn't buckle under pressure. He'd cross-reference wallet addresses, check the liquidity of the bridge's pools. It was a life of extreme precision, where a single misplaced semicolon could result in catastrophic failure. He'd often stay late into the evening, long after everyone else had gone home. He liked the way the office felt when the lights were dimmed, when the only sound was the soft whir of the server fans. He'd do one final sweep of the security alerts, make sure everything was clean. Then he'd shut down for the night. But on this particular evening, something was different. The road that leads to a dying town. Make sure the firewalls were active, that the encryption keys were rotated. He believed the Ronin Bridge was a fortress, protected by layers of mathematics no human could ever hope to break. But the shift didn't begin with a hack. It began with a message. A few weeks before that March afternoon, Vin had been contacted by a recruiter, professional social media, prestigious global investment firm. They offered him a job, a salary nearly triple what he was making, life-changing money. The recruiter sent him a PDF, details of the offer, benefits package. Vin was a security expert, naturally cautious. He ran a quick scan on the file. It came back clean. So he opened it on his company laptop. The document was professional, well written, contained everything he expected to see. He read it carefully, felt a surge of excitement about his future. Eventually, he decided to decline. He wanted to stay loyal to Sky Mavis. And he thought that was the end of it. But the moment he opened that file, a silent, invisible door had been kicked open. A sophisticated piece of malware crawled out of the document, embedded itself deep within the operating system of his laptop. And it sat there for weeks, silently watching every keystroke, capturing every password, mapping the entire internal network of Sky Mavis. A ghost in the machine, waiting. On March 23rd, the ghost woke up. The malware used Vin's credentials to gain access to the private keys that controlled the Ronin Bridge. The attackers needed 5 out of 9 signatures to authorize a transfer. And because of a temporary security shortcut, they were able to gain control of exactly 5. While the world was sleeping, someone began to move money. Not a small amount. $625 million. Imagine it. Your heart isn't just racing. It's physically aching as you stare at the transaction history on your screen. You're watching a digital drain swallow the life savings of thousands of people. You see the numbers moving out of the vault you built. And you realize something horrifying. You were the one who let the thief in. A wave of icy cold washes over your body, starting at your fingertips, moving toward your chest. You try to type, but your hands are numb. You're the person everyone trusted to keep the money safe. You spent your entire life studying how to build walls. And yet the enemy didn't climb over them. They walked through the front door. Because of a job offer you thought was real. The air in the office feels poisonous. You realize the entire future of everything you've built is collapsing. Right now, in real time, over the next 2 years, in an unprecedented move, the FBI and crypto investigators managed to track and freeze over $30 million of the stolen funds as the hackers tried to launder the money. Sky Mavis eventually raised enough capital to reimburse the affected users. But the scars on the company and the industry remained. Vin stayed with the firm, worked harder than ever to rebuild the bridge, with even more layers of security. He no longer trusts any document, any email, any recruiter. He learned the hardest way possible that in the digital age, the most dangerous vulnerability in any system isn't the firewall. It's not the encryption. It's the person sitting in the chair. The Ronin Bridge heist was a wake-up call for the entire world. Proof that the invisible wars of the future will be fought with lines of code and social engineering. It was a victory for a shadow nation that turned a video game into a geopolitical crisis. But as we leave the servers of Vietnam behind, we have to shift our focus to the quiet streets of Japan. Because while some thieves use code to steal millions, others use a much more direct and violent approach. This new group of criminals didn't need to send fake emails or build malware. They were looking for something much more personal. The homes of the elderly, the vulnerable. And they were directed by a mastermind thousands of miles away, hiding in a place where he thought the law could never reach him. He used a simple messaging app to recruit a new generation of gig economy criminals, turning a quiet country into a battlefield of home invasions. Early evening, January 19th, 2023. The suburban neighborhood of Kami, Tokyo. The air was heavy with cold, damp mist. The streets almost unnaturally quiet, a hallmark of residential Japan, where people value silence above almost everything else. Inside a modest 2-story house, the only sound was the low, muffled chime of a doorbell. A polite digital 2-tone melody, echoing softly through the hallway. That chime was supposed to be a symbol of a safe and orderly society. In Japan, a knock at the door usually means a neighbor bringing a gift, or a delivery driver with a package. But on this night, that sound was the first note in a symphony of terror that would eventually shock the entire nation. The person standing on the other side of that door was not a neighbor, and they were certainly not there to deliver anything but a nightmare. 90-year-old Kinuyo Ashio lived in that house, a woman who had lived through the most transformative decades of Japanese history. She She was a pillar of her community, a retired woman known for her kindness, her impeccable manners. Kinuyo was the kind of person who still wrote handwritten thank you notes, who spent her afternoons tending to a small, perfectly manicured garden of bonsai trees and seasonal flowers in her backyard. She was the anchor of normalcy in her family, a woman who represented the old world values of trust and security. Kinuyo lived alone, but she never felt lonely, never felt afraid. She lived in a country where the crime rate was so low that people often left their doors unlocked, where trust wasn't just expected, it was the foundation of everyday life. But that trust was about to be shattered, where leaving your front door unlocked while you ran to the store wasn't careless, it was normal. To her, the idea of a violent home invasion was something that happened in movies, or in distant, dangerous countries, not in a quiet suburb of Tokyo. Kinuyo's daily routine was a masterclass in peaceful repetition. She woke every morning at 6:30, exactly, as the sun began to peek over the rooftops. She'd spend 20 minutes doing light stretches, slow, deliberate movements. Then she'd make herself a cup of green tea, using the same ceramic pot her mother had given her 50 years ago. She loved the way the steam felt on her face in the morning. After tea, she'd spend at least 2 hours cleaning her home. But this wasn't just a chore. It was meditation. She'd use a damp cloth to wipe down every wooden surface, moving in small, circular motions. She'd sweep the tatami mats with a traditional broom, listening to the soft, rhythmic scratching sound it made against the straw. She knew every inch of that house, every creak in the floorboards, every shadow in the corners. By noon, she'd walk to the local market, carrying a small cloth bag. She'd buy exactly what she needed for the day: a small piece of fish, a handful of rice, a few fresh vegetables. She'd exchange polite greetings with the shopkeepers, discuss the weather, the price of fruit. Then she'd walk home, taking the long way through an imagine you're a satellite technician, sitting in a quiet office in London, staring at a screen full of raw data pings. You notice a series of handshakes between a satellite and a plane that shouldn't be there. You realize that while the world thinks the plane crashed in the South China Sea, it was actually flying for hours into the most remote part of the planet. You feel a cold, heavy weight in your stomach as you calculate the fuel and realize there's nowhere to land. Now imagine you're a family member waiting at the gate in Beijing. You look at the arrival board, see the words delayed in red letters. You tell yourself it's just a technical glitch, a weather issue. But as the hours turn into a day, and the day turns into a week, that small spark of worry turns into a roaring fire of grief. You realize that your loved ones didn't just have an accident. They vanished from the face of the earth in a way that defies all human logic. Every logic gate in your brain is searching for a reason. Was it a mechanical failure, a hijacking, a deliberate act by the pilot? You see the news reports showing millions of square miles of empty blue water being searched by ships and planes from 20 different countries. You see the barnacle-covered pieces of debris washing up on distant islands years later. Do you believe the ocean is just too big to be searched? Or do you believe the truth is being hidden? The search for MH370, became the largest and most expensive in aviation history. But for 12 years, it yielded almost nothing. The black boxes were never found. The main wreckage remained a ghost. But the revelation came in early 2026. Thanks to a revolutionary technology called WSPR, Weak Signal Propagation Reporter. This isn't a radar system. It's a global network of low-power radio signals that act like invisible tripwires. A British aerospace engineer named Richard Godfrey spent years analyzing these radio signals from the night the plane vanished. He discovered that as MH370 flew through the atmosphere, it disturbed these weak radio waves, leaving a faint trail, a digital shadow, leaving a digital breadcrumb trail across the sky. By mapping these disturbances, Godfrey was able to track the plane's final movements with a level of precision previously thought impossible. The data revealed something chilling. The plane didn't just fly in a straight line until it ran out of fuel. It performed a series of complex maneuvers, including a holding pattern that lasted for 20 minutes over the open ocean. This suggested that someone was at the controls until the very end. Most importantly, the WSPR analysis pointed to a very specific, unsearched area of the ocean floor, about 1,200 miles west of Perth, Australia, in a deep canyon. In late 2025, the Malaysian government officially reviewed these findings and agreed to a new no-find, no-fee search proposal for 2026. High-tech underwater drones, capable of scanning the seabed at depths of 20,000 feet, are now preparing to descend into that dark canyon. For the first time in over a decade, there's a physical coordinate on a map that might finally hold the answers to the greatest mystery of our time. The story of MH370 is a haunting reminder that even in an age of total connectivity, the world is still vast enough to hide a giant. It's a tragedy that left 239 families in a state of permanent, agonizing limbo. But as the new search vessels move into position in 2026, there is a persistent hope that the silence will finally be broken, and that the ocean will be forced to give up the secrets it has kept. As we conclude this journey through stories of the strange, dark, and mysterious, we're reminded of something important. Whether it's a man fleeing an airport, a hiker frozen in ice, or a plane lost at sea, the truth has a way of leaving a trail. Sometimes that trail is made of DNA. Sometimes it's made of radio waves. And sometimes it's just a lingering question that refuses to go away. Thank you for listening. And please remember to take care of each other out there.